People think money buys class, but more often than not, it just amplifies exactly who someone already is. Chloe Harrington learned this the hard way, in the middle of a crowded, Michelin-starred dining room, when the man she had supported for 5 years looked her dead in the eye and told her she was fundamentally inadequate. No man of actual substance, no rich man, would ever want you, he sneered, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. It was a sentence meant to break her. But exactly 7 days later, the paparazzi caught Chloe slipping out of the heavily fortified gates of Nathaniel Reed's Bel Air estate, wearing last night's dress and a smile that brought Wall Street to a standstill. The evening began with the illusion of celebration. Derek Gallagher had just been named the youngest senior vice president in the history of Sterling and Hayes Wealth Management. To mark the occasion, he had booked a corner booth at L'Hermitage, a restaurant in Beverly Hills where the tasting menu cost more than Chloe's monthly rent. Chloe had spent 2 hours getting ready, pulling her unruly chestnut hair into a sleek twist and wearing a classic, albeit 5-year-old, navy slip dress. She had been with Derek since their days sharing instant noodles in a cramped Boston apartment. She had proofread his financial models, ironed his cheap suits before his first interviews, and worked double shifts as a luxury estate manager so he could afford to take unpaid internships. She thought tonight was their shared victory. She was wrong. Derek didn't order champagne to celebrate them. He ordered a vintage Bordeaux to celebrate himself. He spent the first 40 minutes of dinner checking his phone, his thumb swiping through congratulatory emails from men with generational wealth. When he finally looked up at Chloe, his eyes were cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of the warmth she remembered from their 20s. "We need to talk about the future, Chloe," Derek said, swirling the dark red liquid in his glass. "My future." "Okay," Chloe smiled hesitantly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. He pulled it away under the guise of reaching for his water glass. "The circle I'm entering now, it requires a certain caliber of presentation," Derek continued, his voice adopting the clipped, arrogant cadence of the men he idolized. "The partners host dinners, there are galas, charity auctions in Aspen, weekend trips to Cabo with clients who control billions in assets. The women at these events, they are refined. They come from legacy families. They understand the nuances of this world." Chloe's heart began a slow, heavy pounding against her ribs. "Are you saying I don't?" "Look at you, Chloe," he sighed, a sound heavy with manufactured pity. "You manage houses for rich people. You fix their plumbing emergencies and yell at their caterers. You're the help. And while that was fine when we were kids trying to scrape by, it's a liability now. You don't have the pedigree. You don't have the network." The cruelty of his words paralyzed her. This was the man who used to cry on her shoulder when the stress of his exams was too much. Now, he was dissecting her worth like a bad stock portfolio. "You're breaking up with me because I'm not rich enough?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm breaking up with you because we no longer align," Derek corrected smoothly, leaning in. He wanted to make sure she understood the finality of it. "You're a sweet girl, Chloe. But let's be realistic. You'll never fit into my new world. You are invisible to people with real power. Honestly, no rich man would ever want you. You don't speak their language." He didn't even pay the bill. He left a corporate card on the table, stood up, buttoned his bespoke Italian suit, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Chloe alone under the glaring, crystal chandeliers. She sat there for an hour, the humiliating sting of his words echoing in her ears. He hadn't just broken her heart, he had tried to obliterate her dignity. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. Chloe hadn't slept in 3 days, her eyes were red-rimmed, and her apartment felt suffocatingly empty, without Derek's golf clubs in the corner. But Chloe Harrington was not a woman who allowed grief to stop her from paying her bills. She walked into the offices of Apex Lifestyle Concierge, grabbed a triple espresso, and sat at her desk. Her boss, a high-strung woman named Beatrice, marched out of her glass office looking frantic. "Chloe, I need a miracle," Beatrice demanded, dropping a 3-inch thick binder onto Chloe's desk. The Saint Laurent estate in Bel Air. It was just purchased off-market for $85 million. The new owner is moving in on Friday and hosting an introductory gala for 200 of the city's elite on Saturday. The house has been empty for 2 years. The plumbing is questionable, the landscaping is a jungle, and the previous estate manager just quit because the new owner is impossible. "Who is the new owner?" Chloe asked, flipping open the binder. "Nathaniel Reed." Beatrice whispered the name like an incantation. Chloe knew the name. Everyone did. Nathaniel Reed was a self-made tech magnate, a man who had built a cybersecurity empire from a garage in Seattle and recently sold a secondary company for $3 billion. He was famously reclusive, fiercely private, and notoriously intolerant of incompetence. "I have 4 days to prep an $85 million estate for a billionaire and organize a 200-person gala?" Chloe asked, her mind already shifting into logistical overdrive. The heartbreak was still there, a dull ache in her chest. But the adrenaline of a crisis was a welcome distraction. "If you pull this off, you're getting a promotion and a 20% bonus. If you fail, Apex loses the biggest fish in Los Angeles, and we're both fired," Beatrice said grimly. By noon, Chloe was on the grounds of the Saint Laurent estate. It was a sprawling, Mediterranean-style mansion with terraced gardens overlooking the city. But Beatrice was right. It was a mess. The fountain in the driveway was choked with leaves, the grand foyer smelled of dust and neglect, and the smart home security system was completely fried. For the next 3 days, Chloe practically lived at the estate. She commanded armies of landscapers, bullied a premier catering company into changing their menu, and personally scrubbed the antique marble floors in the master bathroom when the cleaning crew missed a spot. On Wednesday afternoon, the stress reached a boiling point. The HVAC system in the grand ballroom died. With the gala only 3 days away, it was a disaster. Chloe was in the basement mechanical room, her hair tied in a messy bun, her white blouse smeared with grease, furiously arguing with an HVAC dispatcher on the phone. "I don't care if your best guys are in Malibu," Chloe shouted into her phone, kicking a wrench across the concrete floor. "I need someone here in an hour, or I will personally ensure your company never works in the 90210 zip code again." She hung up, burying her face in her hands. "Throwing wrenches doesn't usually fix a blown compressor," a deep, quiet voice observed from the doorway. Chloe spun around. A man was standing there, leaning against the doorframe. He was tall, wearing faded denim jeans, heavy work boots, and a plain grey t-shirt dusted with drywall powder. He had dark hair, striking, intelligent eyes, and a quiet stillness about him. She assumed he was one of the subcontractors she had hired to fix the security gates. "I know it doesn't fix it," Chloe snapped, wiping a smudge of grease off her forehead. "But it made me feel marginally better for about 3 seconds. Are you the gate technician?" "Something like that," the man said, stepping into the room. He walked over to the massive HVAC unit, pulled a multi-tool from his pocket, and bypassed the main panel. "You're running this whole circus upstairs?" "Trying to," Chloe sighed, handing him a flashlight without him asking. "The owner is arriving on Friday. He's apparently a terror who demands perfection, and if this house isn't flawless, my career is essentially over." The man chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. He shone the light into the machinery. "A terror, huh? That's the word on the street?" "That's putting it mildly. The guy is a billionaire. In my experience, guys with that kind of money lack basic human empathy. They view people as chess pieces," Chloe said, the bitter sting of Derek's recent words bleeding into her voice. "They don't see the work. They just expect the magic." The man paused, looking at her over his shoulder. His gaze was piercing, taking in her messy hair, her grease-stained clothes, and the sheer exhaustion in her eyes. "You seem to have a pretty low opinion of this guy you've never met." "It's not him, specifically," Chloe admitted, softening slightly. "It's the ecosystem. But hey, he signs the checks, and I need the money, so I will make sure his house is perfect." For the next hour, the gate technician helped Chloe rig a temporary bypass for the compressor. They worked in tandem, passing tools, troubleshooting, and surprisingly laughing. He was sharp, pragmatic, and didn't talk down to her. "You're pretty good at this," he said, wiping his hands on a rag as the air conditioning finally roared to life. "Most estate managers just point and yell. You get your hands dirty." "I don't believe in asking someone to do a job I wouldn't do myself," Chloe said, packing up her clipboard. "Thanks for your help. I didn't catch your name." "Nate," he said, holding out a hand. "Chloe," she replied, shaking it. His grip was firm and calloused. "Well, Nate, I owe you a beer when this is all over. But right now, I have to go stop a floral designer from putting hydrangeas in the master suite. The dossier says the owner is allergic." Nate smiled, a genuine warm expression that changed his entire face. "Good catch, Chloe. Good luck with the terror." Saturday evening arrived, and the Saint Laurent estate was utterly transformed. The driveway was lined with imported Italian sports cars. The gardens were illuminated by thousands of fairy lights, and a string quartet played Vivaldi by the newly cleaned fountain. It was a masterpiece of event planning, and Chloe was the invisible conductor, operating from a small command center off the kitchen, an earpiece tucked into her ear. She wore a simple black tailored suit, the standard uniform for Apex management. She felt exhausted, but deeply proud. She had pulled off the impossible. Around 9 p.m., Chloe stepped out of the kitchen and into the main hallway to check on the coat check flow. As she rounded the corner near the grand staircase, she froze. Standing by a marble pillar, holding a glass of scotch and aggressively networking with a real estate mogul, was Derek. He looked exactly as he had a week ago, smug, polished, and desperate to belong. Chloe's stomach plummeted. Of course he was here. Sterling and Hayes would have killed for an invitation to Nathaniel Reed's introductory gala. She tried to pivot and walk back to the kitchen, but Derek caught sight of her. His eyes widened slightly in surprise, then narrowed into a familiar, mocking smirk. He excused himself from the mogul and sauntered over to her. "Well, well, well," Derek said, his eyes raking over her plain black suit and the earpiece. "I have to admit, Chloe, I didn't expect to see you here. But I suppose someone has to make sure the rich people have enough ice in their drinks." Chloe stood her ground, forcing her spine straight. "I'm managing the event, Derek. I'm working." "Exactly," he sneered, leaning in close so only she could hear. "Look around, Chloe. This is what I was talking about. Look at the women in this room. Look at the men. We are the guests. You are the help. Did you really think you could ever fit in a room like this as anything else?" Before Chloe could formulate a response that wouldn't get her fired, a sudden hush fell over the crowd in the adjacent ballroom. The string quartet stopped playing. "Ladies and gentlemen," a booming voice echoed over the sound system, "please welcome your host for the evening, Mr. Nathaniel Reed." Derek immediately puffed out his chest, turning away from Chloe to face the ballroom, eager to catch a glimpse of the billionaire. He adjusted his tie, his face adopting a mask of sycophantic eagerness. Chloe watched as the crowd parted. A man walked onto the small raised dais at the end of the room. He was wearing a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo that looked like it cost more than a luxury sedan. He commanded the room without saying a word, exuding a quiet, absolute authority. Chloe gasped. It was Nate, the gate technician, the man she had fixed the HVAC unit with, the man she had ranted to about billionaires lacking human empathy. Nathaniel Reed stepped up to the microphone. He looked out over the sea of wealthy, influential faces. His eyes scanned the room, cold and analytical, until they landed on the hallway archway. He spotted Derek, and then, right behind him, he saw Chloe. A slow, knowing smile spread across Nathaniel's face. "Thank you all for coming," Nathaniel began, his deep voice resonating through the room. "They say a man's home is his castle, but I can assure you, when I bought this place, it was closer to a ruin." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. "I have many people to thank for bringing this estate back to life," Nathaniel continued, his eyes never leaving Chloe. "But there is one person in particular who deserves the real credit tonight. Someone who doesn't just point and yell, but gets her hands dirty. Someone who literally kept the air conditioning running so you all wouldn't sweat through your couture." Derek chuckled loudly, trying to show he was in on the joke, completely oblivious. "Chloe Harrington," Nathaniel's voice rang out clearly, silencing the room. "Could you come up here, please?" Derek froze. The blood drained from his face as he whipped his head around to stare at Chloe. The surrounding guests parted, creating a clear path from where Chloe stood directly to the stage. Chloe was rooted to the spot. Her heart was hammering violently. She pressed her finger to her earpiece, terrified this was some sort of horrible mistake. But Nathaniel just stood there, his hand extended toward her, waiting. Taking a deep breath, Chloe stepped past a paralyzed Derek. She walked through the crowd of millionaires, socialites, and corporate titans, her simple black suit standing out against the sea of diamonds and designer gowns. When she reached the stage, Nathaniel stepped down, bypassing the stairs entirely, and took her hand. He didn't just shake it. He brought it to his lips and kissed the back of it, a gesture of profound, old-world respect that made the entire room gasp collectively. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathaniel said, pulling Chloe gently to his side, ignoring the shocked whispers of the elite crowd. "Meet the woman who runs this house better than I run my companies. The brilliant Chloe Harrington." As the room erupted into applause, Chloe looked out at the sea of faces. Her eyes locked with Derek's. He looked small, pale, and utterly insignificant, watching the woman he claimed was invisible to power, standing shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful man in the room. And for the first time in a week, Chloe smiled. The applause eventually died down, replaced by the low, eager murmur of 100 networking conversations resuming with renewed vigor. Nathaniel gently released Chloe's hand, though his physical proximity remained a solid, protective barrier between her and the crowd. "Breathe, Chloe," he murmured, his voice pitched perfectly, so only she could hear it over the string quartet, which had smoothly transitioned into a lively Mozart piece. "You look like you're about to faint, and that would ruin my grand gesture." You're Nathaniel Reed," she stammered, the absurdity of the situation finally crashing over her. "You let me yell at you about the HVAC dispatcher. You let me lecture you about billionaires." "I found your lecture highly educational," Nathaniel replied, his eyes dancing with quiet amusement. "And for the record, I completely agreed with your assessment of the local contractors. Now smile. The sharks are watching." They were. Every eye in the room was subtly tracking their movements, and none were more fixated than Derek Gallagher. As Nathaniel guided Chloe towards the edge of the dais, Derek practically shoved a prominent real estate developer out of the way to intercept them. His face was a mask of desperate, sweaty ambition. He had quickly calculated that his connection to Chloe was no longer a liability. It was a golden ticket. "Chloe, sweetheart!" "No," Derek exclaimed, using a pet name he hadn't uttered in 3 years. He reached out to grab her arm, but before his fingers could even graze her sleeve, a massive figure materialized from the shadows. Liam Hastings, Nathaniel's head of security, stepped between Derek and Chloe. Liam was a former Delta Force operator, a man built like a granite vault with a scar cutting cleanly through his left eyebrow. He didn't say a word, but the sheer, imposing reality of his presence made Derek stumble backward, his drink sloshing onto his polished shoes. "It's all right, Liam," Nathaniel said softly, though his tone held the unmistakable edge of command. Liam stepped back a fraction of an inch, his eyes locked on Derek's throat. Nathaniel turned his full attention to Derek, The warmth that had been in his eyes when he looked at Chloe vanished, replaced by an arctic, terrifying emptiness. "Mr. Gallagher, I presume," Nathaniel said. It wasn't a question. Derek swallowed hard, desperately trying to puff his chest back out. "Yes, sir. Derek Gallagher, Senior Vice President at Sterling and Hayes. Chloe and I go way back. We're very close." Chloe felt a surge of pure nausea. "We aren't—" Nathaniel held up a single finger, silencing her with gentle authority. He took a step closer to Derek. "I am well aware of who you are, Derek." "I make it a point to know exactly who is in my house," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping to a low, conversational register that somehow commanded more attention than a shout. "I also know that Sterling and Hayes has been aggressively pitching my family office for the past 6 months, hoping to manage a fraction of my liquid assets." Derek nodded eagerly, completely missing the trap closing around him. "Exactly, sir. And with my recent promotion, I would be honored to personally oversee your portfolio. We offer unparalleled service to clients of your pedigree." Nathaniel tilted his head, studying Derek as if he were a particularly uninteresting insect. Pedigree. An interesting word. "You see, Derek, I don't care about pedigree. I built my first server rack out of scavenged parts in a freezing Seattle garage because no bank would give an underdog engineer a loan. I value loyalty. I value competence. I value people who get their hands dirty." Nathaniel stepped even closer, his height and presence dwarfing the younger executive. "What I do not value are arrogant, short-sighted men who treat the people supporting them as disposable stepping stones. I do not do business with men lacking basic character." Derek's confident facade shattered. He looked around frantically, realizing that several highly influential people were eavesdropping on the exchange. "Mr. Reed, I assure you my professional character is—" "Your professional career is over," Nathaniel interrupted smoothly, his voice devoid of anger, which only made the statement more devastating. "Before I walked down those stairs, I sent a brief email to Arthur Sterling. I informed him that not only will I never allow his firm to manage a single penny of my wealth, but if you're still employed by his institution come Monday morning, I will actively advise my network to withdraw their funds from his management." Derek turned an ashen, sickly shade of grey. You can't do that. Over a breakup? I am a billionaire, Derek. As Chloe astutely pointed out to me in the basement on Wednesday, we view people as chess pieces, Nathaniel said, throwing Chloe's own bitter words back with a protective, vindictive spin. "And I just took you off the board. Liam, escort Mr. Gallagher off my property. He is trespassing." Liam stepped forward, his massive hand clamping onto Derek's shoulder with the force of an industrial vice. Derek didn't even have the breath to protest as the former military operative turned him around and marched him silently towards the front doors, past the staring crowds, and out into the cold Los Angeles night. Chloe stood frozen, the sheer magnitude of what had just happened short-circuiting her brain. She had wanted Derek to realize her worth, maybe feel a pang of regret. She hadn't expected a titan of industry to vaporize his entire corporate existence in under 2 minutes. Was that entirely necessary? Chloe whispered, her eyes wide as she looked up at Nathaniel. "He publicly humiliated you because he thought you were powerless," Nathaniel said, adjusting his cuffs with frustrating nonchalance. "I simply corrected his market analysis. Now, Miss Harrington, your shift is officially over. We have business to discuss." By Tuesday, Chloe's entire reality had been rewritten. She had formally resigned from Apex Lifestyle Concierge. Beatrice had screamed, threatened, and then practically begged her to stay. But Nathaniel's counteroffer had been impossible to refuse. Director of Global Estates for the Reed family office. Triple her previous salary, full autonomy, and a budget that made her head spin. Her first assignment, however, wasn't a glamorous villa in Monaco or a penthouse in Manhattan. "Wyoming," Chloe said flatly, staring out the window of the private terminal at LAX. You bought a 2,000-acre ranch in Jackson Hole in the middle of February. Technically, I bought it in November, but the renovation's just finished, Nathaniel replied, handing her a steaming cup of coffee. He was dressed in dark denim and a heavy cashmere sweater, looking entirely too comfortable for a man who had just dismantled a Wall Street bro's life. It's an operational rescue ranch. I need you to assess the property manager's competence and audit the facility upgrades before we move the first herd of horses in next month. Horses, Chloe echoed, taking a sip of the coffee. I'm a city girl, Nate. My idea of wilderness survival is navigating the subway during a transit strike. You managed my gala flawlessly. A few barns shouldn't intimidate you, he smiled. 20 minutes later, they were walking across the tarmac toward a gleaming Gulfstream G650. The roar of the jet engines and the smell of aviation fuel was a far cry from her cramped cubicle at Apex. Inside, the cabin was a sanctuary of cream leather and polished walnut. Chloe sank into a wide seat, watching the Los Angeles skyline shrink to a grid of twinkling lights as they banked aggressively into the clouds. The flight was quiet, focused. Nathaniel spent the first 2 hours deep in encrypted files on his laptop, while Chloe reviewed the extensive architectural blueprints for the Wyoming property. She was struck by the sheer scale of his operations. He wasn't just a tech guy. He was a silent benefactor to dozens of causes, including the equine rescue they were currently flying toward. But as they crossed the border into Wyoming, the smooth flight abruptly ended. The jet shuddered violently. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, devoid of the usual pilot drawl. Mr. Reed, we've got a massive pressure front moving in faster than meteorological predicted. Visibility at Jackson Hole is dropping to 0. We're going to have to execute a hard landing before this blizzard completely shuts down the airspace. Nathaniel closed his laptop, his jaw tightening. He looked across the aisle at Chloe, whose knuckles were white as she gripped the armrests. "Seatbelt tight, Chloe," he ordered, his voice remarkably calm. "These pilots are ex-military. Best in the business. We're going to be fine." The descent was terrifying. The windows were entirely blinded by swirling, aggressive whiteout conditions. The plane bucked against brutal crosswinds. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. Suddenly, a warm, calloused hand covered hers. She opened her eyes to see Nathaniel leaning across the aisle, his grip steadying her. When the wheels finally slammed onto the icy tarmac, the thrust reversers roared like chained beasts, fighting for every inch of traction. They skidded slightly before finally coming to a halt at the absolute end of the runway. "Welcome to Wyoming," Nathaniel breathed, releasing her hand only when the engines powered down. Getting from the airport to the ranch was a survival mission in itself. They traded the luxury of the jet for a heavily armored SUV driven by a silent local guide. The blizzard had descended with apocalyptic fury, burying the mountain roads in feet of snow within hours. By the time they reached the heavily timbered gates of the Ironwood estate, the temperature had plummeted to 20 below 0, and the wind was howling like a wounded animal. The ranch house was a sprawling masterpiece of log and stone, but it was completely dark. "Power grid is down," Nathaniel noted, pushing open the massive oak front doors and ushering Chloe inside, out of the lethal cold. The silence of the empty house was heavy. The property manager had evidently evacuated to the town before the storm hit, leaving them entirely alone. Chloe stamped the snow off her boots, her teeth chattering despite her heavy coat. So much for the facility audit. "We pivot," Nathaniel said, shedding his jacket and moving toward the massive stone fireplace dominating the great room. Within 10 minutes, he had a roaring fire going, relying on the skills of a man who clearly knew how to survive outside a boardroom. He produced thick wool blankets from a cedar chest and draped one over Chloe's shivering shoulders. "I have to admit," Chloe said, huddling close to the flames as the storm battered the reinforced glass windows. "When I pictured working for a billionaire, getting snowed in and freezing to death in the wilderness wasn't on the bingo card." Nathaniel sat beside her on the thick rug, the firelight catching the sharp angles of his face. "I told you, I'm just an engineer who got lucky. My baseline is survival, Chloe. I don't panic when the power goes out. I just build a fire." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the space between them seemed to shrink, charged with a sudden, heavy tension that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. "You didn't panic either," he observed quietly. "On the plane, in the car. You don't break under pressure." "I spent 5 years building a life with a man who told me I was worthless the second he got a taste of real power," Chloe said, the honesty ripped out of her by the isolation and the adrenaline of the day. "A blizzard is just weather, Nate. Betrayal is what actually breaks you." Nathaniel's expression darkened, his jaw clenching. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair away from her face. It was an intimate, startlingly tender gesture from a man known for his ruthlessness. "Gallagher was a fool," Nathaniel said, his voice a low rumble over the crackling fire. "He looked at a diamond and threw it away because he preferred cheap glass. But his absolute lack of vision?" He leaned in closer, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second before meeting her eyes again. "Is entirely my gain." Before Chloe could process the sudden shift in the atmosphere, a loud, metallic crash echoed from outside, momentarily drowning out the wind. Nathaniel was on his feet instantly, his romantic demeanor vanishing, replaced by the sharp instincts of a man who trusted nothing. "That came from the lower barns," he said, grabbing a heavy-duty flashlight from a tactical bag near the door. "The barns?" Chloe asked, standing up, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "You said the herd wasn't arriving until next month." "They aren't," Nathaniel said grimly, pulling his coat back on. "But there are 3 rescue Clydesdales that the manager was supposed to transport to the lower valley yesterday. If he left them locked in the lower barn, without the secondary generators running, they'll freeze to death by morning." Chloe didn't hesitate. She dropped the blanket, grabbed her snow-covered coat, and jammed her feet back into her boots. Nathaniel paused, his hand on the heavy iron door handle. "Chloe, it's a whiteout out there. Stay here by the fire." "You said you hired me because I don't just point and yell," Chloe replied, her chin tilted up in defiance. "I get my hands dirty. Let's go save some horses." The trek from the main house to the lower barns was only 400 yards, but in a Wyoming whiteout, it felt like traversing a hostile alien planet. The wind screamed with a deafening, physical force, tearing at Chloe's clothes and stinging her eyes with microscopic shards of ice. Nathaniel led the way, his broad shoulders breaking the brunt of the gale, keeping a protective grip on Chloe's arm to ensure she wasn't swept off her feet by the sheer velocity of the storm. When they finally wrenched open the heavy sliding door of the lower barn, the sound of the wind was muffled, replaced by the frantic, terrified nickering of horses. The temperature inside was lethal. It was a massive, state-of-the-art equestrian facility, but without the secondary heating grid, the steel-reinforced walls were turning it into a freezer. In the 3 oversized stalls, 3 magnificent Clydesdales were pacing frantically, their breath pluming in thick white clouds, frost already gathering on their heavy winter coats. "They're freezing, Nate," Chloe gasped, her breath catching in her throat as she rushed to the nearest stall. The massive horse, a gentle giant with a white blaze down its face, nudged its freezing muzzle against her gloved hand, seeking warmth. Nathaniel was already moving past the stalls toward the utility room at the back of the barn. The property manager, Harrison, assured me the backup generators here were fully serviced on Wednesday. They should have kicked on the second the grid failed. Chloe followed him into the utility room. Nathaniel clicked on his heavy-duty flashlight, sweeping the beam across the massive industrial generator. He stopped. The beam locked onto the control panel, the thick, insulated copper wiring connecting the alternator to the main power grid hadn't just failed. It had been cleanly severed with bolt cutters. The motherboard of the control panel was smashed, crushed inward by repeated blows from a heavy object, likely a sledgehammer laying discarded on the concrete floor. "This isn't an equipment failure," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. "This is deliberate sabotage." "Sabotage?" Chloe echoed, her mind racing. "Who would sabotage a horse barn in the middle of a blizzard?" "It's not just a barn," Nathaniel replied, quickly stripping off his heavy gloves. He knelt by the ruined machinery, his underdog engineer instincts taking over. "Beneath this facility is a secondary, off-grid server farm for my cybersecurity firm. It houses the beta architecture for a predictive AI that half of Wall Street and 2 foreign governments would kill to get their hands on." Harrison didn't evacuate. He was paid to blind the security grid so someone could breach the servers. Before Chloe could fully process the gravity of corporate espionage, a heavy metallic thud echoed from the far side of the barn, followed by the sound of a door being kicked open. Nathaniel instantly killed the flashlight, plunging them into absolute darkness. He grabbed Chloe by the waist, pulling her silently behind the massive bulk of the dead generator. He pressed a finger to her lips. His heart was beating a steady, controlled rhythm against her back. Footsteps crunched on the frozen concrete. Heavy tactical boots. Not one person, but 3. "Grid is dead. Servers should be completely vulnerable. Find the access hatch," a rough voice barked over the howling wind outside. It wasn't Harrison. These men were professionals. They operated with the precision of a corporate cartel, a shadowy syndicate hired to dismantle Nathaniel's empire by any means necessary. "Nate, what do we do?" Chloe whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I need 5 minutes to hotwire this generator using the auxiliary truck batteries and my multi-tool," Nathaniel whispered back, his hands already moving in the dark, feeling the severed wires by memory. "If I can get the power back online, the automated security lockdown protocol will seal the server vault in 3 feet of tungsten steel, and the heating grid will turn on. But I need a distraction." "I'll give you a distraction," a new voice murmured from the shadows near the entrance. It was Liam, the former Delta Force operator, materialized from the darkness like a ghost. He had tracked their footprints from the house, armed with nothing but a tactical baton and a localized communication jammer. He didn't carry a firearm. Nathaniel strictly forbade lethal weapons on his properties, but Liam's body was a weapon in itself. "Liam, there are 3 of them. They might be armed," Nathaniel warned softly. "They are," Liam replied, his voice devoid of any inflection. "It won't matter. Get the heat on for the horses, boss. I'll handle the trash." What happened next was a masterclass in controlled violence. Liam moved with terrifying speed. The sound of a baton striking a collarbone echoed through the barn, followed by a choked gasp. The intruders scrambled, drawing suppressed handguns, but Liam was already among them, using the stalls and the shadows as cover. He disarmed the first man with a brutal joint lock, using the man's own momentum to send him crashing into a wooden support beam. While Liam systematically dismantled the corporate mercenaries in the dark, Chloe acted as Nathaniel's hands. She held the frayed ends of the copper wire together, fighting through the agonizing cold, seeping through her gloves, while Nathaniel used the pliers of his multi-tool to strip and splice a bypass directly into the backup battery array. "Hold it steady, Chloe. Almost there," Nathaniel grunted, his jaw tight with concentration. "I'm holding." She pushed back, her hands shaking from the cold, but her grip like iron. She wasn't the girl crying in a Michelin-starred restaurant anymore. She was fighting for survival. "Contact!" Nathaniel shouted, slamming the final connection home. Sparks showered the concrete. The massive diesel engine of the generator coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life with a deafening mechanical scream. The overhead industrial lights flickered and blazed into existence, flooding the barn with blinding white light. The heavy hum of the thermal heating units immediately kicked in, pumping warm air down into the stalls. Simultaneously, a massive hydraulic lock engaged beneath the floorboards. The server vault was sealed. The sabotage had failed. Chloe slumped against the vibrating generator, gasping for air. Nathaniel pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "You did it," he breathed, the relief evident in his voice. "You didn't break." In the center of the barn, Liam stood over 3 groaning, incapacitated men, meticulously zip-tying their wrists. He looked up at Nathaniel and gave a sharp, single nod. "Trash secured. Local law enforcement is 10 miles out, plowing their way through the storm." Nathaniel looked down at Chloe, his eyes fiercely protective. "Are you okay?" "I'm freezing. I smell like diesel fuel, and I think I just aided in a tactical takedown," Chloe laughed, a sound of pure adrenaline. "But the horses are warm." Nathaniel smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that made her heart race faster than the fear had. He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers, a promise of heat, safety, and something profoundly real amidst the chaos. "Remind me to triple your salary when we get back to Los Angeles." The photograph that set the financial and social worlds on fire was published exactly 1 week after Derek had abandoned Chloe at L'Hermitage. It was captured the morning after the Bel Air Gala, mere hours before Chloe and Nathaniel boarded the Gulf Stream to Wyoming. The high-resolution paparazzi shot showed Chloe slipping out of the heavily fortified, wrought-iron gates of Nathaniel Reed's estate. She was wearing Nathaniel's oversized, faded grey MIT sweatshirt layered over her ruined designer gala dress, holding a steaming cup of coffee and laughing at something the reclusive billionaire was saying just off camera. The media went completely rabid. The headlines practically wrote themselves: "The Invisible Estate Manager and the Reclusive Tech Titan." It was a modern-day Cinderella story for the tabloids, but behind closed doors, it was a tactical war. 6 months later, the dust from the Wyoming blizzard had settled, but the legal storm was reaching its absolute peak. The Edward R. Roybal Federal Building and United States Courthouse in downtown Los Angeles was a monolith of imposing granite, echoing marble corridors, and absolute authority. Chloe sat in the second row of the gallery in courtroom 14, wearing a sharply tailored, midnight blue Tom Ford suit that screamed quiet luxury and impenetrable power. Nathaniel sat beside her, his demeanor relaxed but his eyes sharp, his large hand resting comfortably over hers on the polished wooden partition. The courtroom was packed to the fire marshal's absolute limit. Journalists from the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and local networks were crammed into the press benches, their pens poised. Federal agents lined the perimeter. The United States government was prosecuting a massive, multinational case of corporate espionage, wire fraud, and conspiracy. At the defense table, sitting perfectly rigid and looking physically ill, was Derek Gallagher. He was unrecognizable from the smug, polished executive who had discarded Chloe over a tasting menu. He had lost at least 20 pounds. The bespoke Italian suits he used to flaunt now hung loosely on his diminished frame. His arrogant smirk had been permanently erased, replaced by a terrified, sweaty pallor. The investigation, triggered by Liam's flawless capture of the mercenaries in the Wyoming barn, had unspooled a terrifying conspiracy. The syndicate, identified as Blackwood Capital, had been actively paying off corporate insiders to steal proprietary billion-dollar tech across the West Coast. And their newest, most eager, and ultimately most foolish informant had been Derek. Desperate to impress the senior partners at Sterling and Hayes, and enraged to the point of obsession by his public humiliation at the Bel Air Gala, Derek had reached out to unsavory contacts he had cultivated during his aggressive networking sprees. He had used his brief time inside the Bel Air estate to memorize the names of Nathaniel's key contractors, focusing on the corrupt property manager, Harrison, Assistant United States Attorney Robert Sterling, no relation to Derek's former firm, stood before the jury. He was a seasoned prosecutor who specialized in dismantling white-collar criminals. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sterling began, his voice echoing in the silent room, "the defense wants you to believe that Mr. Gallagher was a naive junior executive, manipulated by international criminals. The digital footprint tells a vastly different, deeply arrogant story." Sterling gestured to a massive monitor displaying a web of transactions. "Derek Gallagher did not just stumble into a conspiracy, he initiated it. Enraged by a personal grievance, he utilized his highly secure terminal at Sterling and Hayes to bypass standard protocols. He brokered the introduction between Harrison, the property manager of the Ironwood estate, and operatives from Blackwood Capital. His goal? To facilitate a localized blackout during a catastrophic blizzard, allowing mercenaries to breach a subterranean server vault containing predictive AI source code. Chloe watched Derek flinch as the prosecutor detailed his exact crimes. The prosecution called FBI Special Agent David Croft to the stand. Croft, a veteran of the Cyber Division, clinically dismantled Derek's life. Agent Croft, can you detail the financial compensation Mr. Gallagher expected for this act of treason against his own industry? The prosecutor asked. Yes, Agent Croft replied, adjusting his microphone. We intercepted encrypted communications on the Signal app, directly linking Mr. Gallagher's personal device to a Blackwood handler. Mr. Gallagher negotiated a payout of $2.5 million, which was to be routed through a shell corporation registered in Belize. Furthermore, we found drafts of emails on Mr. Gallagher's hard drive, preparing to use the stolen AI data to artificially inflate the portfolios he managed, which would have earned him millions more in corporate bonuses. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. It wasn't just corporate espionage, it was an attempt to rig the financial markets. Nathaniel squeezed Chloe's hand slightly. She looked up at him. His face was an unreadable mask, the expression of a man who played chess 12 moves ahead of everyone else in the room. He had known all of this, of course. His own cybersecurity firm had handed the FBI the encrypted keys on a silver platter. When the defense attorney finally took the floor, it was an exercise in futility. Against all legal advice, Derek insisted on taking the stand himself. It was the ultimate display of his narcissistic delusion. He believed he could talk his way out of federal prison, just as he had talked his way into elite circles. I was trying to expose a monopoly, Derek practically shouted from the witness stand, his voice cracking, staring directly at Nathaniel. Men like Reed, they hoard technology. They control the market. I was trying to level the playing field for my firm. I'm a victim of a billionaire's vendetta because his girlfriend used to be mine. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Judge Eleanor Mitchell, a formidable woman with 30 years on the federal bench and zero tolerance for Wall Street entitlement, slammed her gavel down with the force of a gunshot. Order, Mr. Gallagher. You will restrain yourself, or I will hold you in contempt before this jury even deliberates, Judge Mitchell warned, her voice dripping with ice. Derek slumped in the witness chair, his chest heaving, realizing too late that his outburst had just alienated the last remaining sympathetic juror. He had revealed his true character, bitter, entitled, and utterly devoid of accountability. The jury deliberation took less than 4 hours. When the foreperson read the verdict, the words felt heavy and absolute. Guilty on all counts. Judge Mitchell did not delay sentencing. She looked down at Derek from the bench, her expression a mix of disgust and professional exhaustion. Derek Gallagher, the judge's voice cut through the heavy silence of the courtroom. You utilized your position of immense privilege and trust to facilitate the physical sabotage of a secure facility, endangering the lives of innocent people and animals, and attempted the theft of assets vital to national security. You sought wealth without the labor, and absolute power without a shred of moral responsibility. You viewed the law and the people who supported you as disposable stepping stones. She paused, looking directly into Derek's hollow eyes. On the charges of conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, wire fraud, and reckless endangerment, I sentence you to 180 months, 15 years, in a maximum security federal penitentiary, without the possibility of early parole. You are permanently disbarred from trading, managing, or interacting with the financial sector. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $6.2 million, liquidating all your current assets to do so. The gavel slammed down, sealing his fate. The sound was the ultimate, crushing weight of hard karma. Derek collapsed entirely into his chair, a broken, sobbing mess. The life he had ruthlessly clawed his way toward, the elite circles he had sacrificed his humanity to join, evaporated into nothingness. He was bankrupt in every conceivable way. As the federal marshals moved in, pulling Derek roughly to his feet to handcuff him, he looked back over his shoulder. His bloodshot eyes searched the gallery frantically until they locked onto Chloe. She didn't gloat. She didn't offer a dramatic smirk or a wave. She simply looked at him with profound, impenetrable calm. He had once looked her dead in the eye and told her no man of substance would ever want her. Now he was being hauled off to a cage, completely stripped of his identity, while she sat unbothered, her worth undeniable. Nathaniel stood up, smoothly buttoning his suit jacket. He didn't even spare Derek a passing glance. A lion does not concern itself with the fate of a rat. He offered his hand to Chloe. "Are you ready to go home?" Nathaniel asked, his voice a low, comforting rumble amidst the chaos of the adjourning court. "Yes," Chloe smiled, taking his hand. "I have a 2:00 video conference with the architects about expanding the equine therapy center in Wyoming. We need to finalize the heated barn blueprints, and then I believe we have a dinner reservation to celebrate." "Let me guess," Nathaniel mused, guiding her expertly through the throng of reporters pushing towards the aisle. "L'Hermitage?" "Absolutely not," Chloe laughed, a bright, genuine sound that echoed above the clamor as they stepped out into the blazing Los Angeles sunlight. "I know a place in a strip mall in the valley that makes the best street tacos in the state. And the best part? The chef is an underdog who built it from scratch." Nathaniel pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her waist, completely ignoring the blinding flashes of the paparazzi cameras waiting on the courthouse steps. He kissed the top of her head, his eyes fiercely proud. "Lead the way, boss." So, what is the real currency of a meaningful life? If you think it's the balance in a portfolio, the zip code on a deed, or the designer label on a suit, you might end up like Derek Gallagher, bankrupt in every sense of the word. Chloe Harrington's story is a raw, intense reminder that true value isn't found in a pedigree. It's forged in the fires of resilience, loyalty, and the willingness to get your hands dirty when the storm hits. She didn't just survive the ultimate betrayal. She weaponized her competence to build an empire of her own alongside a man who actually recognized her worth.